Welcome everyone to my presentation for today. Today I'm going to talk to you about ADOT's Stormwater program and what it encompasses. Hopefully you're going to be able to learn a lot on this journey, and hopefully with this presentation we can give a bunch more presentations about the program so that we can keep you informed as to our stormwater program and why it's important for ADOT and what resources are available out there for you and other information that would be pertinent to maybe even your programs in your departments. We're always looking for ways to partner with other people about with the stormwater program, and hopefully this will be the first in many presentations that we can give about this and go from there. I am your host today, David Mack. And before we begin and go right into it, I want you to look at this beautiful picture before us. It's of I-10, just outside of Tucson. The lanes facing us are the eastbound lanes heading into Tucson, and those are the Picacho mountain range in the back, with the Picacho mountain on the west side of the photo. If you haven't hiked it, please, you might want to consider hiking or at least going to the state park over there once the weather start getting better and when the flowers start blooming. Hopefully we've had a wet enough season. We'll have some beautiful poppies all through that area, and you can go hiking. And if you get up to the very top of that mountain, it's a beautiful view from that area. But what I really want to point out is that rainstorm passing from the west to the east in this background. Rain has no boundaries, but we do here on the ground. And our ADOT stormwater program is all about boundaries. As one of the important things about the program is boundaries. And so we're going to talk to you today about our program and about how we manage it and how we use it and going here at ADOT. All right. So for our outline today, we're going to talk about understanding stormwater. We're also then going to talk about the permit and the SWMP. And we spell SWMP, SWMP. I'll define that when we get to that section. We'll get our hands dirty with a little bit of monitoring, and then we'll talk about some challenges that we face. Before we get too far into it, I want to talk about water resources. Water Resources Group is located in environmental planning, which is located under IDO construction. There are 4 of us in this group: our manager, Eileen Dunn, and my partners in crime, Laura Norton, who is the MS4 permit and construction general permit coordinator, Richard Mendolia, who is our groundwater and wastewater systems coordinator, and then myself, the industrial stormwater SPCC, which stands for Spill Prevention, Control, and Countermeasure, and Tier 2 reporting coordinator. Here's our first poll question. So go down to the poll and answer it. The first question is what is stormwater? It's a multiple choice. Is stormwater A, cloud formations, B, runoff generated when precipitation flows over land surfaces, C, precipitation that soaks into the ground, or D, a good way to dispose of hazardous chemicals? I've never done a poll before, so I'm actually going to answer this too. So let's see what happens. Oh, and well, hey, it looks like everybody's pretty much got it right. A couple people are voting for some interesting choices. I think some people just like to mess with the polls. So, but these are pretty good. Ultimately, what it comes down to is, yes, stormwater is runoff generated when precipitation flows over land surfaces. All right. So majority of you got that right. Some of you that picked some of the other ones, it's okay. We'll get you educated on this presentation. So what is stormwater? Well, stormwater is precipitation that falls from the sky, lands on our built environment, and runs off into our arroyos, streams, lakes, rivers, all of our water bodies out here in Arizona. What's important about it is that when stormwater runs off of our built environment, especially our built environment, it picks up a lot of pollutants along the way. And those pollutants get carried into our water bodies, which is can be and will probably become a very precious resource here in the near future. Here's a beautiful diagram from Caltrans explaining what stormwater is, and I think it really articulates what's going on with when it rains and how water flows over our land surfaces. So now we're into poll question number 2. And question number 2 is stormwater runoff that enters the storm drain goes through a water treatment plant before being released to the environment. True or false? Okay, so then I got to hit vote. All right. As the votes come in, since I've never done this before, this is kind of new to me. I think next time if I would do this, I'd put the Jeopardy music in the background. I think that's very appropriate for this.
If you want, I can sing it for you, Dave.
No thanks. All right. I think we have enough votes. False. It is not treated. So those that pick false is actually correct. So we have 2 types of systems out here in the West and in more recent, I would say more recent infrastructure. You have a system where you have a storm sewer system and a sanitary sewer system. A sanitary sewer system is the system that collects our drain water from our sinks, our toilets, our bathtubs, and any other collection systems that you may have in your home or business. And then that goes to a pipe, which is then gravity fed and quite possibly, even in some cases, pumped up to a treatment plant where it is treated, it is cleaned up, and then it is discharged into our waterway system. Stormwater runs off of our properties into the streets, curbs and gutters, catch basins, storm drain system, and then exits the storm drain system into our waterways. It is mostly untreated. In some areas of the country, back east especially, we do have some type of treatments, but they're very small in nature and they only take up only so much area because the systems that they use are very passive and they take up a lot of room, so they're very cumbersome. So they can't clean a lot of stormwater, but they have them in small areas all over the place. Versus a system like New York, which has a combined sanitary and stormwater system. So during a normal rain event, the streets discharge into the curbs and gutters, catch basins, and then discharge into the sanitary system. And that goes all to a treatment plant prior to discharge into their base. But during heavy storm events, such as hurricanes, that water goes into the storm drain, but then it impacts the system because there's too much rainwater combined with the sewer flow that it backs up, and then it bypasses the treatment plant and goes into their base. We don't want that. So the best way to handle it is to have a separate system. There are 2 main impacts of stormwater on our systems, and the first one is water quantity. Like I said, a flooding event is a water quantity event where we have too much water impacting our system. We've seen that recently in California with their wet winter that they've been having, and we've seen it here in our neck of the woods here on ADOT where we've had underpasses flooded. Basically, too much water is coming into the system, and and in that event, debris and sediment and whatnot that's left on the road is getting into our drainage system, which is preventing the pump houses from actually working. So then we get flooded underpasses and sometimes stranded people in those, and then we get on the local news, and it's a fun time for everybody who has to deal with that. That's a quantity issue. Here in stormwater, we actually deal with water quality. We want to make water as clean as possible using control measures that we have in our program before it even gets off our site, so that when it gets discharged, it's as clean as possible. So we're dealing with the quality of the water. We want it to be as clean as possible. So when the storm hits and the water runs off properties, it runs into a conveyance system, a publicly owned conveyance system called an MS4, a municipal separate storm sewer system, or MS4. That public conveyance consists of curb, gutter, drains, and then eventually pipes, which go to a waterway. For ADOT, and that works for most cities, and pretty much all cities in Arizona, cities and counties, are regulated as an MS4. ADOT is no different. However, our system has a little bit of difference with them, is because it includes all of our statewide network and associated facilities such as maintenance yards, ports of entry, MVD offices, and any other properties we own. And all that, and when that gets into our system and goes through our curbs and gutters and catch basins and whatnot, we want to try to make, that whole system is our stormwater system, and that's what we're trying to make sure that is in good shape. So the way that happens, so these publicly owned treatment systems, or MS4s, are all regulated by a permit system. And that permit system is regulated by the EPA and then delegated to the states. The state, in this case, Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, dictates to us a permit that allows us to discharge stormwater to protected surface waters in accordance with the permit requirements. Now, the permit that we are currently under has been effective since July 1 of 2021. We have been under a stormwater permit managing our operations since the late 90s, approximately 1998, when we had our first permit issued by the EPA. Then in the early 2000s, around 2001, 2002, 2003, I can't remember the specific time, we then transitioned to an ADEQ permit. And since then, we've had 3 ADEQ permits, culminating with this one being our latest. So for the past over 20 years, we have had a permit dictating our stormwater discharges. So the permit is very filled with a lot of technical jargon and a lot of information, both state and federal regulations. As such, those regulations are very cumbersome to work through. Both Laura and I work through them. We try to decipher them. We reread them over and over and over. But what it comes down to is that we really, truly need a game plan to really make sure that we're effectively managing it. And this is where the SWMP comes in, the Stormwater Management Plan. This is our game plan that's for ADOT, that's an in-between from the permit to actually how we're going to implement things in the field. The SWMP consists of these 10 areas that are covered in the permit that we have to talk about, that we have to manage. And through that, the SWMP dictates what we're going to do in each one of these sections. I'm not going to go over these sections in detail. There's just a lot of information in each one, but in further presentations, we'll cover some of these in more greater detail. The SWMP, like I said, is our game plan, but when the elements of the SWMP are implemented, they are expected to prevent pollution from being discharged into receiving water bodies from our facilities and our activities. And really, truthfully, the main goal is to protect water quality, satisfy applicable surface water quality standards, and preserve Arizona's precious water resources. I believe using it as part of our local water supply, some way, shape, or form. It's potentially an inevitability. So the cleaner we can make it and the better we can treat it, the better it is for us going to be in the future. Now, when we write the SWMP, we have 4 principles that we live by, both Laura and I live by. The first one is what needs to get done, who needs to do it, when it needs to get done, and what records need to be kept. These are the 4 main principles we try to write the SWMP by. And we have to go through and review it annually every year to make sure that the program is up to date and is working with ADOT and ADOT standards. So we're constantly revamping it too. So how does it affect us here at ADOT? Well, as ADOT employees, it means understanding our stormwater program and participating in ways to reduce pollution from entering our storm drain system. Maybe it's just picking up stuff in our yards and cleaning up stuff after when we do work on the roadways. Maybe it's making sure we keep our goods back where they belong, reporting spills as we need to, whatever it is, just as long as that we all are doing the same thing and making sure that we're not discharging stuff into our storm drains and impacting people downstream. Other things that we can do are ask questions, participate in training sessions such as this, and becoming familiar with our control measures or BMPs, best management practices, in our manuals and other which ways that we help to protect stormwater quality. Now, in the chat, we are providing you with a resource guide that is going to list out more information about our program. Please take a moment, download that, and check on those links. We also have on the azdot.gov webpage, we have a link through there with our permit fact sheet, SWMP, and manuals. And we've even developed an internal water resource webpage through Google Sites that's just for us internally to help with Laura and I manage our program. And on this one, you'll actually see, that's a picture of our main page there, but you'll actually see some of the data we're collecting and information in relatively real time so that we, Laura and I, can get a handle on what's going on within our system at any given time. So please check that out when you get a chance. So we have this permit, we have this swamp, we have this program. Now we have to do a check on the program to make sure that we're actually doing what it says we are doing. We say we're going to do this. We now have to prove that through monitoring. And we have a very robust monitoring program. We've been collecting stormwater samples from our roadway and maintenance yards for approximately the past 15 years. And the purpose of that, as defined by the permit, is to characterize stormwater quality and identify stormwater pollutants, detect and eliminate illicit discharges, and to basically evaluate the overall effectiveness of our control measures and/or BMPs that we employ to keep stormwater as clean as possible. This is a conceptual model performed by others that basically identifies the pollution sources on our right-of-way. It's a pretty simple model in that when we look at it, the first component is the atmospheric fallout. So when precipitation falls to the ground, it brings with it not just a raindrop, but other chemicals with it, whatever's in the air. That's why when the storm passes and we could see across the valley or the valleys, whether you're in Phoenix, Tucson, or any other valley, you could see across the valley in this beautiful, clear sky and everything, is because that storm came through and cleared out all the dust. Well, where did that dust go? It went down to the ground. It went onto our roadway. When that rain hits our roadway, it's also picking up other things, such as vehicle deposition. When you get a moment, next time you're driving on the road, look at the other vehicles around you. What stage of decay are they in? Are they brand new and look great, or are they old and dirty? What's the condition of your vehicle? Are you leaking oil, antifreeze? What are the trucks on the road? Do they have secure loads? Are loads stuff flying out of the back of their trucks? All these things contribute to pollution on our road, which when it rains, comes off our road. There is also our activities too. So in the north, we do sanding and salting activities because of the winter weather. That gets left on the road. Next time it melts, it goes with the stormwater off-site. We also, our activities with relation to painting, I mean, we have to restripe the road every so often. Anybody who hits anything on the road leaves debris all over the place. There's multiple activities that even we do that leave pollution, debris, sediment, metals, whatever on the roadway that eventually get caught up into the storm system. There's also a little bit from our adjacent properties that also run on, because the way our systems tend to work, we run parallel to certain things, and like the drainage flow. So adjacent properties, adjacent cities, adjacent industries, whatever, also have a tendency to have their stuff discharge off their property, which then flows through our property, which then contributes to this total block at the end, the runoff block. That's the point, that if we implement the SWMP as best as we can, and we're doing everything we can do, that's where I'm monitoring, and that's where we're hoping that the results I get from that are low and below surface water quality standards, and we're doing a good job. That's where we're testing at that runoff point. The monitoring requirements are established in our permit and reiterated in our SWMP. And basically what they state is, when is sampling required? How often do we sample? Where do we collect the samples? How much do we collect? And what do we test for? And we're going to talk about some of that right now. We are required per our permit to sample one time per season. And the seasons are defined as a summer season from June 1st to October 31st, and a winter season from November 1st to May 31st. So I am required to collect one sample in the summer and one sample in the winter. That's it. That's all I do. I spend a lot of time working on this with consultants to make sure that we collect those samples. Sometimes it doesn't go perfect. Sometimes I have to collect 2 or 3 samples in that time frame to make that one sample, but we get it done as quickly as we can and as early in the season as possible. We sample 5 roadway locations and 2 maintenance yards. Our roadway locations are Flagstaff, Sedona, Phoenix, Tucson, and Nogales. In Nogales, we also sample the maintenance yard because of its close proximity to Nogales Wash, and the Superior Maintenance Yard because of its close proximity to the Queen Creek. We employ 2 types of sampling systems. For the roadway, we employ an active sampling system. We use automated samplers. We use the ISCO brand automated samplers to actually actively monitor 24/7, 365 rain events and flow events. And so what basically happens here is, if you look at the left photo, this is of our Nogales site. And here we use standard utility cabinets with our equipment in them. And then the long pole with the white bucket on top, that's our rain gauge. That tells us when it's raining and how much rain is accumulating over time. That goes to a central computer system. And then these gray boxes in here, the one labeled avalanche on the right and the one that looks like a drum in the center, they're both the same units. They're both sampling units. They collect water from the storm drain. But the difference between the two is the avalanche is actually a refrigerated unit. We can't get to it in time because of how far away they are from Phoenix and Tucson. So we have refrigerated units, while in Tucson and Phoenix, we actually do not at this time, but we are changing that. And so what ends up happening is that inside these 2 units is a 9-liter bottle where we collect all the sample. And then what we're sampling is our storm drain system. As you can see here, I have 3 different storm drains. The one on the left, bottom left, is at our Tucson Grant Road yard. The one in the middle is the Phoenix in the West Valley, an open trench. And the third one on the right is our Sedona site. And in the pipes are a sensor and a siphon tube. And the sensor is very sensitive, and it detects both the flow of the water and the weight of the water. So it sends out a Doppler signal to determine that water is coming towards it and flowing through it. And then on top of that, there's a sensor on the bottom that actually detects the pressure of water on top of it. So that sensor, in combination with the rain sensor, let me know that a storm event is occurring. And then what we're ultimately sampling is what we see here in our Sedona unit, this water right here. In our maintenance yards, we use a passive sampling system. Basically, they're Nalgene bottles, and they're placed in the ground. Water passes over them, they fill up, then they get stopped with a stopper, and then we just pull them out of the ground after the storm event, put them on ice, and send them to the lab. Same with the auto samplers is that we take the 9-liter bottle out, we put it into its respective bottles, and then we take it to the lab for analysis. When we actually take it to the lab, we're asking the lab to look at a lot of these parameters, such as total dissolved solids, total suspended solids, nitrate, nitrites, organic toxic pollutants, such as polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which is basically a list of hydrocarbons that can be found in water. We're also looking for E. coli and various metals. When we actually now this is a graphical representation of a sampling event. So what we're looking for here is the relationship of the rainfall and the stormwater flow over time. So if we focus on the blue line at first, we'll see that it starts at 1/100th of an inch and exponentially increases over the course of the storm because it's adding up 1/100th of an inch, 100th of an inch, and 100th of an inch over time. But just because it rains doesn't mean that stormwater flows right away. The area where it's raining has to get saturated first. And then once that saturation occurs, even if it's pavement, it still has to get saturated a little bit before it starts to flow. When it starts to flow, it gets into the curb and gutters, it gets into the storm drain system, it starts to flow. And in this particular case, it took about a half hour between the start of the rain event to the actual flow that we could actually detect. Now, like I said, once my rain gauge reaches a certain threshold and once my sensor reaches a certain threshold, the computer system works and says, all right, it's time to go, and we start sampling. And that point is met, and then that first black dot is recorded. That's an actual sampling event. And what this black bar is actually 29 individual sampling events. It just happens to look like one big black bar. And so what we end up doing is we capture that sample, we send it to the lab, and this is our flow proportionate composite sample. When we collect this early in the season, this is usually the dirtiest water that we have. If we were to collect water after this, it'd be, and compared the two results, it would be much cleaner. But we are required to collect this at the first flow because we want to collect the dirtiest water because we want to make sure that our BMPs are working. Once we get the results back from the lab, we then need to compare those results to standards. So the first one we compare them to is Arizona Department of Environmental Quality's surface water quality standards. Now, since this presentation, this part of my presentation is part of another presentation that I give, we've actually got some additional data that we've compared it to. And the first one that we've compared it to is the Highway Runoff Database, which is managed by the USGS. Basically, what's going on here is that the USGS put a call out and has asked DOTs across the nation to submit their sampling data. And so we can query that database as a DOT and find out what other DOTs are doing and compare our results to their results. And so, as you can see here, it's very California dependent, but it's got some very good information in it. We've also looked at the City of Phoenix's data because their data is available, and they have about 20 years of monitoring data just like us. And so they're a very robust system too. So we can now also make sure that we're comparing to something more local. Before I talk too much about what's going on in the slide, let me set up the slide for you a little bit. On the bottom, you have arid, mesic, semi-arid, average US, Arizona urban, and ADOT. Going with the first three starting on the left, arid. Arid is defined as an area of less than about 10 inches of rain a year. That's about equivalent to Phoenix. The mesic is equivalent to anything over 15 inches a year. So Flagstaff and Sedona. Semi-arid is between 10 to 15 inches a year. So that's about Tucson, Nogales. Then next, what we did is we took the average of those three results and just averaged it into one column. Then we took the Arizona urban and put it in. And then we have the average of ADOT's 5 sites in the last column. Now, I'm not going to worry too much about those first 3 columns. I just want to focus on the average, the Arizona urban and ADOT. Now, total copper is copper in general is just a very important element to Arizona and Arizona's economy. We have a lot of copper mines, and we have a lot of places where copper is just naturally abundant in our soils. We also use copper, and copper is one of the reasons why I'm able to present to you from my house to your house and using all these wonderful computer systems that we have. So copper is very ubiquitous in our daily lives too. We even code it on pennies. As such, when we look at cars and roadway surfaces, we don't really have a lot of copper in the roadway surface. We have a lot of copper underneath it with relation to our electronic systems. But for cars, they have electronic systems and they have brakes. Copper is still used as a cohesive pad on the braking pad to help reduce your speed when you apply the brake pedal. So every time you do that, what ends up happening is the brake pedal sheds, and eventually you'll have to replace them, but that copper gets lost to the environment, especially our roadway. When we look at the average US compared to ADOT, we're sitting about the same. While it is a little more abundant in our environment, it's probably in the air, it's probably being deposed, it's probably naturally occurring in our soils, we're about the same. So what we can relate that to is probably things like cars and brake dust and a couple other items associated with transportation and copper. But when we look at the Arizona urban, we're sitting below that. And the reason for that is most likely is because there's more contact points. I mean, just drive down the city of Phoenix and downtown Phoenix, and you're going to hit a bunch of stoplights. Every time you hit a stoplight, you're going to brake. Or somebody's going to turn in front of you, you're going to hit the brake. There's more surface points and more contact points for that copper to accumulate so that when it rains, that copper gets washed off and goes into their system. And then when they record it at the runoff point, they have more. So what we're seeing here is that while comparably, we're very comparable to DOTs, we're also comparable to the city of Phoenix. And when we compare it to the surface water quality standards, we're way below the surface water quality standards set in around 80 micrograms per liter, while the standard is set up at 500 micrograms per liter. So we're way below it. So we're doing really good with copper. Another result we look at is TSS, or total suspended solids, and TDS, total dissolved solids. In order to think about total suspended solids versus total dissolved solids, let's think about a snowplow. When we're plowing the road and we're putting sand and grit on the road, salt and grit on the road for traction and to destroy the ice and make it less slippery out there, that salt gets dissolved in the water and we can't see it. So that becomes a dissolved solid. But that grit, if it gets washed out in the stormwater, becomes a suspended solid. We can see it. If you remember back a couple slides, I had that picture of the discharge going through Sedona. You notice that the water was not clear. That's because of the suspended solids. Suspended solids for us are usually things such as soil particles and other types of gross particulates in the water column that are just readily there. And what we're seeing with our results, again, if we're comparing just the average Arizona urban and ADOT, that we tend to be much higher than the other DOTs. And that's a normal thing to see, because remember, a lot of those DOTs, they were California dependent, but they were also a lot of northern environments. Northern environments can grow grass on their right-of-ways. We don't put a lot of vegetation on our right-of-ways. We do have trees, but we also lay down a lot of DG. And with that, no matter how much you put down, there's still soil underneath it. That soil does get hit with water. It does get saturated. It does get released into the water column. And so that's what we're seeing in relation to that. That's why it's so high. I would like to, we can compare it more to the Arizona urban, but again, more contact points, more points in the system for them to have soil available, for instance, that's more readily erodible and available in their sampling program. Now the TDS, again, we said was something like a salt that dissolves, or it can even be a metal that dissolves in water. And what we end up having to see is that we're a little bit less than the average US, because we don't apply a lot of salts to our road except only in the northern areas. We don't do it statewide. So our averages are pretty low. We're very comparable with the city of Phoenix because there are, again, contact points throughout the system, and that will still produce dissolved solids in our water column. And then when we compare them to the surface water quality standards, again, we're looking at 500 micrograms per liter, and we're sitting below that for TDS. So we're doing really good. So for a monitoring takeaway, we've been collecting data for 15 years now, and we have a lot of data and a lot of information. With that, what we're seeing is that we're on par with other DOTs across the nation. But we still need to do further research, and we're about to finish a research project where we've actually tackled some of these questions about what specifically is in our right-of-way that is causing some of these impairments in our runoff. So hopefully in the near future, we can actually present you that information. Our stormwater program is pretty robust, but there's always challenges and there's always things going on and things happening that even we cannot control. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of challenges that we're facing right now. One of them is up in Sedona. Back in February of 2019, there was a lot of rain that occurred. And so we ended up having a situation where our sampler, the left picture, got damaged. What we thought originally happened was that the Oak Creek, which is just off the picture, basically it's behind the camera person who took that photo, we thought it rose and came in through the grate at the bottom and damaged our sampler. But when we look at the picture and we look at the evidence, we're not seeing that the river rose. What we believe happened is that the storm drain pipe that we see much more clearly in the right photo actually was full of water all the way up to the top and was coming out of that thing like a fire hose. We have no pictures of the event, and we're not exactly too sure what happened, but that's what we think happened. And the reason why we think that happened is because, one, that sediment pile that's underneath that open door is only underneath that pipe. And two, if you look at the right photo, that line from the top of the drain into our box, that line was impacted with a lot of sediment and debris. What we think ended up happening is that pipe filled up so much that the force came through the pipe connecting the drainage to our box and forced so much water in there that it caused our equipment to get damaged. We lost about $12,000 worth of equipment that day. We had to replace it all. It doesn't happen often, and most of our sites, we've made sure that we can not have that issue ever again. But the chance is always there. Luckily, we have redundant systems in place now that we don't, if something like that were to happen, we'd be able to replace the equipment easier and better at this point in time. Now on the right, we're also having problems, just like a lot of other departments are having problems out on the roadway with the homeless population. In Sedona, we've not had this problem before, and now it's starting to show up. The homeless are starting to use the storm drain system, and particularly this one, as a locker. So they're throwing their stuff in there, which is not good. We're also seeing that the homeless are sleeping in that pipe too. And remember back a couple photos, I showed you that sensor, that black box sensor that sends out the Doppler and pressure sensor. Well, during the night, he was kicking it, and my my emails and text messages were going off. Well, we found it, and we found this out, and we got him out of there, and we told him, don't go back in there. But the problem is that if he kept kicking it, he could severely damage it. That product alone is $3,000 and about a 6-month lead time. Luckily, we were able to grab samples, and we pulled everything out and put it in the box. So now all we're doing is just recording the rainfall events in that area. But it's a problem that we're seeing all over the place. In Tucson, we've had this situation where I had my Tucson sensor. We were picking up a lot of rain, but we weren't picking up any samples. So we went out there and investigated, and we found that the sensor, again, that black box, had about 2 feet of debris on top of it from the pipe. And so then we went to the other side of the freeway, and this is I-10 at Grant Road. And at this point, this is right off the frontage road, and off of our fence line is the railroad that goes through Tucson. And what ended up happening is we saw this. And so what must have happened is that a storm event happened. The pipe collapsed, in that black pipe in there collapsed, and all this sediment dislodged from the slope here and then traveled down the pipe and buried my sensor. When the Tucson East unit was able to finally repair this, they looked at it, and what they believed happened was that the homeless must have gotten into the trench that's right there and started a fire in that pipe. That pipe is made out of plastic, and so fire and plastic don't really mix, and they must have just caused a whole bunch of a situation where the whole pipe just collapsed during a storm event. In this same area, it's a drop inlet structure. So what ends up happening is that since the railroad it's patrolled, but it's not heavily patrolled, and there's a lot of homeless that use it as a transportation corridor, they end up throwing a bunch of their stuff into this trench, which then contributes to gross pollutants in our waterways, such as the Santa Cruz River, and also creates situations where my monitoring is excessively high due to the pollution there, and can also damage my sensor. We went and we cleaned out this trench, and we found needles. We found about 10 hard drives, clothes, wrappers, food, things like that. Everything you can expect from the homeless population. However, the hard drives were very interesting to find. And I have to spend money pretty much twice a year to make sure that this area is cleaned out prior to the sampling season so I can get as clean as samples as possible. And we're starting to see this in other places too. So that's our stormwater program in a nutshell. But in closing, we have a pretty robust stormwater program, and our purpose is to preserve Arizona's precious water resource. If everybody at ADOT does their job, we can protect stormwater and make it as clean as possible. And finally, remember, one of the slogans we use in our stormwater program is "Only rain in the storm drain." We want to try to keep Arizona's precious resource as precious as possible and as clean as possible, but we also want to make sure that it's clean. If we all do our part, clean up after ourselves, maintain good housekeeping, and make sure our system is working functionally, we're doing our part, we're doing our job, and we're going to have good stormwater discharging off our properties. Thank you for this, and let me talk to you about our stormwater program. With that, I am open to questions.
We have one question from Lynn at around 1140 was, what do you do with the sediments that come with the stormwater?
The sediments tend to just flow through the system, and we don't really pick them up or anything unless they're impacting, and then we can get crews out there to clean up. But most of the time, we just let it just pass through the system. One of the ways we can prevent it from getting in the first place is working with street sweeping and getting sweepers out to clean our curb and gutter system before storm events. but we have a lot of lane miles and we have a very limited amount of sweepers. So we have to, each maintenance unit needs to prioritize their areas. But if we could clean up that area beforehand, it wouldn't get into the system. We wouldn't have to come back in and vac out those drains and whatnot, and we can keep the system as clean as possible and flowing.
David Prophet commented the final report for the stormwater study will be out in the next month or so.
I don't know if it'll be out in the next month, but I'm working with the consultant to gear up on a presentation. And so I'm hoping that'll be out in the next month or two. And once it is, it will be available on our website for everybody to look at and read. And then, like I say, we will present the information to Lunch and Learn in the near future.
All right, and Raul Amavisca says Central District asks that pipes over a certain size be concrete, not plastic. I think that's in reference to the last slide of the.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on design standards, but it is what it is.
And Chris Lavoie has his hand raised.
Yes.
I was just gonna ask, when you measure like our pollutants from the rain runoff on the road, could our values actually be lower than recorded because we're getting less rain than other states? Because, especially around the Phoenix area, because it's very arid environment. So some of the northern states or northern part of the state may get rain quite 2-3 times more often than we do. So when we get a rain, we're going to get more copper and more pollutants coming off our roadway.
That is a possibility because we do have long time periods between rain events. For instance, when we get out of this winter season, that should be wrapping up pretty much within the next week or two. We're going to have a dry season all the way until about July. And the pollutants just accumulate and accumulate and accumulate until that next rainfall event. That is a possibility, and that's something that hasn't been factored in. But like I say, with the research study, we'll get a little bit more detailed, and then from there we can do further research into that theory. Any other questions? I saw a couple more hands, I thought.
Yeah, Laura made a comment. Our focus is to prevent sediment from entering the storm drain, and an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And then we do have a question from Luis Lopez. What additional steps are you planning to take to ensure trash doesn't cause standing water on the main lines, namely I-17?
I cannot direct our activities directly, but our maintenance crews do the best job that they can. If our traveling public would make sure that their loads are secure and that they don't have throw out stuff from their vehicles is one thing. And then also with the 17 being in the middle of Phoenix, if everybody did their part in Phoenix, we would have a cleaner I-17, a cleaner I-10, and things like that. We are going to be doing a trash study in relation to some additional research that we're doing about that. I'm not fully familiar with that part of our program at this moment in time, but if everybody did their part, that we would no longer have any more trash issues. Laura, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yes, from the operational standpoint, they have to clean out, in the pump stations, that's doing the cure rather than the prevention. And so what the stormwater program focuses on is we work with the Adopt a Highway and Litter hotline to try to change the behavior that causes the problem, as well as just public information. So if you were to look in our SWMP document, the main focus of our public involvement and outreach is litter prevention and debris and dumping prevention within our system. So that's what we can do, try and change the behaviors that create the problem.
Any additional questions?
How does highway construction impact sampling?
We try not to sample when there's a construction project going on because the construction project is under, it's kind of confusing the way the program's run, but it's under our permit plus a construction permit. So through the planning process, hopefully we're catching if our locations are going to be under construction, and if that were the case, we would actually stop the monitoring during that time while that construction project is going on.
I have a question. I think I read in the news that all the water that California had in the past few weeks, the rivers in LA were full beyond capacity, and I guess their design was that they just make all that water go out into the ocean.
Yes.
And I think you said here in Arizona we kind of designed it to go into streams, which eventually will go to reservoirs or lakes or something like that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so in LA specifically, they have the LA River, and it's basically a concrete channel. Remember the movie Terminator? They filmed in the channel,
Yes.
And various other movies too. So that's a big concrete channel, and its whole purpose is to move water as fast as possible, as away from development as quickly as it can, and then right out into the ocean. We do have concrete lined channels in some of our cities out here, but most of our rivers are still natural with respect that they have a sandy bottom and some type of incised channel. That natural doesn't allow for water. I mean, water still flows and it can still move, but water does also seep into the ground. In LA, one of the things that they are trying to do is to cut up the floor of that channel and trying to make it so that at certain points that water does infiltrate below and back into their aquifer. Eventually, I think that we're going to see stormwater is more precious with the water resources being the way it is, and that we're probably going to have to do something where that we're going to try to keep the waters in the rivers as much as possible so that it soaks into the ground instead of running off. I don't know how we're going to accomplish that or how that would be handled, but I eventually think that if we can keep our waters in our rivers and allow it to naturally go into our ground, we'll increase our aquifers, which will help us through our current water crisis.
And for those people, I've seen this in a few houses where they go buy their own water storage containers and collect water from the rain off their house. But based off of what you said, there's always something in there. So I guess, do you recommend doing that?
Yes, go ahead and collect the water off your house and use it in your garden. And that's part of our program. It's a very small part of our program right at this moment because we're just not handling it, but that's called green infrastructure. And if we can take and slow the water and use it on site before it gets discharged, it helps our plants, it helps the vegetation, it helps various other things. If you can collect this stormwater off your roof into a cistern and use it for the plants, you can help offset the cost of your watering from your water bill onto those plants, which will save you some money. I wouldn't drink the water unless you went and actually bought a purification system. Who knows what's on your roof and all that stuff, but you can go ahead and do that and collect that water and use that water in your garden and help grow your vegetables and all your plants and everything like that. It's a very good idea.
Thank you.
And Laura made a comment that we have something in our post-construction design manual about that.
Great. I think that's all the questions and comments. So I'll say thank you, David, for your presentation, and look forward to see what's next.
All right, thank you. And thank you everyone for attending.